Hello and welcome to another Jacked and Lean Q&A. Today we are doing a nutrition question and answer session where you guys have sent me your questions and I'm going to answer them with real-time practical application answers. Let's get to it. Going over 3 questions today. Question number 1. I see a lot of people divide their weekly calorie surplus in the off season to revolve around training days, while non-training days are kept closer to maintenance. Is this a hard rule or could you just keep the same amount of calories all 7 days of the week? Does the lack of training on your non-training days in the presence of a surplus really cause that much faster fat accumulation if the bigger picture surplus is controlled? It's a fantastic question. And remember, it's going to come down to really the total weekly calorie surplus. That is king. That is what matters the most. Now, I don't want people to go into these non-training and training day style diets with extremes where there's like thousands of extra calories on a training day and a lot less on a non-training day. Realistically, weight training only burns so many calories. And remember, when you train, it's the period after you're recovering where the growth is really going to occur. So to some extent, it makes sense to also put them on non-training days. If you train maybe later in the day on like a leg day, for example, maybe having some more calories on your non-training day can actually help facilitate recovery. So this is going to really be very individual dependent based on when you train, your level of, intermediate or advanced level of training. If you're a more advanced trainee, you might have a greater discrepancy on training versus non-training days because you understand your recovery cycles, your hunger cues, these types of things. If someone is more hungry on a training day, I might give them a little bit more food, maybe before a workout, or if they're really hungry and they train early in the morning, I might give them more after workout. Someone is kind of very sympathetic after they train and they're not extra hungry, I'm not going to force feed them because that can create some digestive issues as well. So again, this is very context dependent. Sometimes there's also a benefit to having a bit of a gut break essentially on either training days or off training days. Like say if you're sympathetic after a leg day, put a bunch of food in, things aren't going to be moving as well. That can create some digestive issues. Or if you're just slamming a lot of food every single day of the week, there's a bit of like a psychological kind of diet fatigue that happens, much like when you're dieting really hard, you're kind of eating the same food, getting, slamming the same food every day. That creates a bit of psychological issue. Or you just eat that much food regularly, and that can also create some digestive issues. So giving someone a maintenance day or two a week based on their training, split might actually serve them well, right? So remember, for some people, this will matter more than it does. For others, I, in general, will go maybe a few hundred more calories on a training day than an off day, but this is very variable, and I've done it a lot of different ways with success. Second question. Whenever I up my food intake on a bulk or my stomach gets all bloated and gassy, I can feel and hear it and wondering if there's any solutions you have. I feel full and gross and usually get constipated, which makes it hard to bulk up. If you're in a surplus, every time you eat a lot, you have digestive issues. A couple things are happening. Number one, you're either eating way too much food, and remember, there's inflammation present when you're eating that much food, and so you're just putting a lot of stress on your body, and your gut is having inflammation, your whole body's having systemic inflammation, and then that's part of the reason why you just feel like junk. Two, you could be a pretty anxious or sympathetic person, and in that case, like I mentioned in question one, you'll typically get a little bit more constipated just because the motility is slowed when you are a high stress in a high stress environment. So if you're like training legs really, really hard, again, you try to eat a bunch of food and you weren't hungry and you're super sympathetic, that's going to cause some potential constipation because things aren't moving through as well. A couple remedies here. Number one, you can have lower calorie days throughout the week in a surplus. You have a little bit more on training days, less on off days, or whatever works well for you there. Sometimes if someone's eating a lot of food, we know stomach acid just can't match the intake of food. I'll add in something like some betaine HCl, 600 to 700 milligrams in a cap typically. So like 1 to 2 caps with a meal, or at least the biggest meal where there are issues, can help with digestion as well. And then thirdly, periodic like fasting days essentially, or like little diet breaks in an off season can help a lot. So not necessarily trying to pull into like a full on mini cut or even a health phase, but just like maybe a week or 2 weeks at some little bit lower calories just to give your digestion a break, still maybe slightly above maintenance to help with the surplus, but you don't need to be slamming in those thousands of calories extra. You could also, again, like have a fasted day where every 6 8 weeks 12 weeks whatever you need, you could have a day where you eat less or skip breakfast or something, again, just to give your digestion a little bit of a break, allowed to catch up. Third and final question. For naturals, would you keep fats a little higher in a deficit because we aren't using exogenous hormones to regulate our testosterone levels? Would you recommend fats at 0.3 body weights or 20% of the calorie intake? So this is a kind of again a very context specific question. In most fat loss diets for naturals and people who aren't taking exogenous hormones, I will have people try to maintain like a 0.2 to 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. I typically don't go based on percentage of calories because as the total amount of calories changes, obviously so does the amount of fat and carbs and all these things. So I kind of set it more so body weight body weight baselines for specifically fats and proteins, typically carbs fill in the rest. But in a deep prep, you will likely have to still push to trace fats or something super, super low, at least in those final weeks of contest prep. And I will do that for naturals. Remember, one of the biggest drivers of hormonal regulation is just your relative energy deficiency syndrome, your REDS. So if you are like super deficient in energy intake or you're outputting a lot and you have lots of stress, maybe sleep is deranged at this point, like late in the prep, you're going to have issues with hormonal regulation regardless of the amount of fat intake. So total calorie balance in some studies and in my experience matters more than any specific amount of fat. So something for you guys to think about, especially you naturals. Now, obviously, if you're enhanced, you could push lower fats for longer from like a purely hormonal perspective. But even then, relative energy deficiency syndrome, even if you're taking exogenous hormones, as you eat less and do lots of expenditure and are fatigued and all these things, you still are likely to have some issues and like drops in libido, whatever it may be. So that wraps up our nutrition Q&A for today. I hope you guys gained something from this. If you have any questions on anything I talked about, please drop a comment below and stay tuned for the next Q&A session.